For some people, there's a misunderstanding of what we talk about here at Nomad Capitalist, and a lot of people are confused about why anyone who's financially successful as an investor or entrepreneur would want to listen to my advice about going to some of the emerging markets that we talk about. So we're going to talk off the cuff. It's, in a sense, Nomad Capitalist. I've got a slightly cracked mug with TWG Earl Grey Fortune Tea. We haven't done this in a while. It's just you and me talking about the reality of the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle. And I have worked with a number of very successful people. Their companies went public. They've made a lot of money. And one thing I've heard a couple different times is, yeah, we went to some big four company, and once or twice I heard, yeah, they gave us some kind of report that was kind of like hard to read, and they really tried, those companies, not to give you very much information. But we think that Nomad Capitalist has their finger on the pulse of what's upcoming. And if you're a very successful person, you realize that what the next place to come, whether you want to invest there, whether you want to get residence or citizenship, to get your toehold there so that whatever happens, you can always be there. The price won't go up on you. You'll always have access. For whatever reason you want access to a certain country, you want to get in before everybody knows about it. Because once a country is Singapore, Singapore has a program now, you need 9 figures to invest in Singapore. Now there's cheaper programs, you can start a business, there's other options, but at the top level, Singapore has a 9-figure investment program if you want to move there and you want to jump to permanent residence. And even then, almost nobody now who has permanent residence is getting citizenship. And I know people who are naturalized Singaporean citizens. It wasn't that long ago you could do that. But in the last 10 years or so, it's very much difficult. Now imagine you wanted to go to Singapore back in the 1980s. It would have been a lot easier. Even up until the early 2010s, it really wasn't that difficult to get into Singapore. And again, it's still possible. But even some of the wealthiest people that we work with, they'll bank in Singapore. But when they look at, I have to spend half the year there are more requirements. It is a bigger financial commitment. It's not worth it anymore with my lifestyle. So Singapore, even if you can afford the 9-figure price tag, when we present that to those people, they're like, there's too many things involved, because Singapore can demand that to get in. So what we talk about here is looking for the next Singapore. And I think that the next Singapore is going to be a number of different places, because you have so many different countries competing that you're going to have a number of different niche players that are each going to try and be successful in something. One thing you've seen a handful of countries throw their hat in the ring of, we want to be the most friendly place for blockchain or for crypto or for Bitcoin. And if you focus on a couple of those niche things as a country, you can be successful. And you'll be known perhaps as the Singapore of this, or the Singapore of that. And so I think that the strategy for a lot of our very successful clients, we take people who have $1 million in liquid assets or who have $500,000 a year in income, but we go all the way up to people who have hundreds of millions of dollars. What they're looking to apply is what I call the global citizen sandwich. They'll bank in Singapore. We had a guy, he cashed out, he got about $500 million, and he started to call the bank in Singapore, and they're like, let's think about it. And I think we were able to plug him into some of our connections, and it ended up working relatively well for him. But even at that level of wealth, the banks sometimes can be cautious. But a very wealthy person might want to bank in Singapore, might want to bank in Switzerland or Liechtenstein or Luxembourg or maybe Andorra, maybe the UK. For some people, they like that. There's some good banks there. But they are looking for a diversified portfolio of residences and citizenships. What I have said is, if I were going to have, with my wife, a child today, I would choose giving birth in Mexico over giving birth in the United States. Neither of us are Americans or Mexicans. Both countries allow any child born on their soil to get their passport. And so if I'm looking forward 18 years from now, I have some resources. I wouldn't give a lot of my money to my child, but I would make sure they're not going to starve. I'd make sure they were safe. They had a safe place to live. And so all those things being considered, I think having a Mexican passport would be much stronger. And that's why we've advised a lot of people to get Mexican residence. And it's a call option on potentially being a citizen in the future. That's something that a lot of people we work with choose to add on to their plans. Argentina, in a different way, is now one that some people are interested in. And so what I'm telling clients is, if you get a couple of these more affordable residence permits, that's an interesting call option on potentially having citizenships that could be highly viable in the future. I think Mexico being one of the most interesting ones. Now it's a bigger trading partner with the U.S., taking business away from China. If I'm looking 18 years into the future, and I was on CBS News talking about the rise of the peso against the dollar, I think Mexico has a bright future. I'm not saying that the average Mexican will be wealthier than the average American, although I think that the delta will shrink. But I'm saying if you already have economic stability, I think being Mexican, both from the terms of geopolitically and traveling and doing business and regulations, whether in your country or when you go overseas, Mexico will be the superior place to be the citizen. Now, my child would have multiple citizenships, but if I can only choose one out of those two, because again, I'm not Mexican and I'm not American, my wife's not, I would choose Mexico looking forward 18 years. And so we all like to say, oh, I wish I would have discovered something 18 years ago. But it's really hard to make the decision now because it's not popular. I was saying when Trump was running, when people were threatening to leave to Canada, and of course they never do, why not threaten to move to Mexico? It's better. And it's the future. Canada's not. I said that in 2016. Turns out I was right. And now you see a lot of people moving to Mexico during the pandemic. You see Canadians who really wanted to go to Canada during the pandemic, and many of them had problems. And so I think what you want, and you don't have to have hundreds of millions of dollars to do this. I mean, we take clients with as little as $1 million in liquid assets. You might not have as many options at that level. But if you're a wealthy person, I might offer you to say, okay, let's check your family tree. Do you have any citizenship you can claim, particularly if it's in a European country? There's also Latin American countries we've helped with, but let's say particularly European countries, because that's kind of the top grade Tier A passport, as we call it. Pretty much any European Union country. That's one part of the strategy. So if you're an American, we've helped people, get citizenship by descent. We've helped people get Malta citizenship by making a donation, close to $1 million. We've helped people move to European countries, or we've had clients who already lived in European countries and they were naturalizing, whether it's Ireland or the UK, where you already speak English, or maybe you move somewhere else and learn it, or maybe you get a golden visa and work towards it in a country like Portugal, which is a little bit back on track now. That's the first part of the strategy. But just as I have multiple residences and passports around the world in emerging countries, number one, you never know where you're going to have to go if you're safe. Now, if you're Peter Thiel or a couple of other billionaires, the Google guys, maybe you can go to New Zealand. I just personally don't want to spend any time in New Zealand. Doesn't mean you shouldn't want to. It's not a place that I want to spend my time. I'd rather spend a couple of weeks a year in Colombia learning about how Latin America is emerging and seeing those opportunities and talking to people there. I'd rather make that a place that I can go. And I don't know if Colombia is the best place in South America, but South America for me, outside of New Zealand, is one of the best places in the world to be if the fur starts flying in the Northern Hemisphere. And so having access to Southern American countries, South American countries, is a good thing. And you know what? You can get some very nice homes. I bought the minimum home that you need to buy to get Colombian permanent residence back when that program existed. But I could have bought I was looking at a property the other day for about $900,000. Beautiful property in a very safe neighborhood by Bogota standards. If you wanted to spend more money, you could certainly spend close to $1 million and buy an amazing property and live there. I'm not in Colombia that long. I'm not in Colombia long enough to pay taxes. So having a home is diversification. It's an asset in another country. It gets me immigration status. And, if you are substantially wealthier, you could buy a bigger apartment. But for me, I'd rather do that from a lifestyle basis than go to New Zealand. Not saying Peter Thiel's wrong, but I think that the average among us have a better chance of getting Colombian citizenship than what Peter Thiel got, which was getting New Zealand citizenship. We know people who've been given very high-level citizenships, but just the average person. And by the way, average person can mean you have $50 million. I mean, the average person with $50 million doesn't have some connections and whatever else. But if you just want to protect yourself, having a home in Mexico, or maybe also having something in South America, is a good idea. Having something perhaps in Eastern Europe. I've taken a number of people to Serbia, some very wealthy people. They're like, this place I just feel like I'll be left alone. I'm not saying it's the answer to all your problems, but hey, if Europe just falls apart, these people are made differently. Georgia, interesting place. I love to go to Georgia and enjoy the wine. There's islands. I'm happy to have citizenship on small islands. And so, if I'm thinking about what are all the different possibilities out there that could happen in the world, black swan events or white swan events, let's call them, good stuff happens. I'd rather be seeing all the potential of Latin America. Look at Mercado Libre stock, by the way. I was aware of Mercado Libre a long time ago because I spend some time every year in South America and I see, what's going on with it. I mean, that stock has done incredibly well. I think you'll find more of those kinds of opportunities if you're surrounded by people who are down there doing stuff earlier. I mean, there are some real, if you look at the Latino Metrics newsletter, they talk about real interesting opportunities in that part of the world. If you spend some time there, you'll find better tips on some real world-changing companies for that part of the world than you would if you just spend time in New Zealand. And so that's why I think for a successful person, maybe if you have, $20 billion, maybe New Zealand's better. But if you have $50 million, I'd rather be in Uruguay or Colombia or somewhere like that. And if I want to bet on a time when I want a lot of productive land, Latin America, I mean, Ecuador is extremely cheap. They've had some problems in the last year or two. I still think, it could be interesting. Some of the cheapest farmland in the world that's accessible to foreigners to buy is in Latin America. So, even if you have $50 million, and I talk to people, and I talked to people for years who have $50 million, they might say, you know what, I don't want to move more than 1% of my net worth into foreign property or into that one foreign property that's productive land. That's where I'm going to go, where I have 500 acres if all hell breaks loose. You're not getting much for 500,000 in New Zealand. In fact, the reason Peter Thiel became a New Zealand citizen is, why we know that, is because he had to be a citizen to buy that land. So again, unless you're a multi-billionaire, you're going to be better off just going to a country where they already allow you to own their land and buying it at extremely low prices. For someone who plans to stay in their country, which a lot of wealthy people that we talk to do, they want to stay in the US or Canada or Australia and just have options. They're not usually saying, hey, take 25 of my $50 million and let's go buy land in some foreign country. They're trying to get started very slowly. And so, buying land in some of these emerging places is interesting. And so I think that what makes this all work is that wealthy people don't have to be in Ecuador or Colombia or in these places very often. I have the ability to live in Colombia as long as I want if something crazy happens, if my lifestyle requires it, if I've got a business project that requires it. We are doing more business in Latin America and with Latin Americans. But I don't have to be there really more than one day a year is what I do. And so I have the option, but not the requirement. The more of those you have, either because you have a residence permit that allows it, or because you have a citizenship that you can always go there for the rest of your life, you and your children generally, and their children, then it becomes tolerable, right? I mean, I don't spend my life in Colombia. And as I get older and more successful, and I've seen a lot of the exotic places in the world, and I've taken advantage of that, there's a part of me that, is saying, all right, let me spend a little bit more time in places that are a little bit closer to what I grew up with in the US, but hopefully without the baggage. And I've talked about Ireland and Switzerland, I think, as being places that are comfortable enough for wealthy people to go, where they function, and you can get citizenship, and you can get good taxes, and all that kind of stuff. So you don't have to live in the places that are up and coming. But imagine if you had a second home in Singapore in the 80s, what that'd be worth today. And you'd seem like a genius. And everyone would say, wow, you're smart. It's like people in the Bitcoin community always talk about, hey, people said, oh, I wish I would have bought Bitcoin. Right, well, when Bitcoin was in the tank not very long ago, people were laughing at it. Oh, that's stupid, it's over, it's done. Well, now it's back, and now people wish they did it. It's the same thing with countries. You want to go to a country and people are kind of laughing at it. Once it's Singapore, it's expensive. I'm not saying Singapore can't be part of your deal. Even Singaporean banks are harder to accept clients these days. I just talked to a bank the other day. They're the most accepting bank we have in Singapore, but they want 1.5 million US. Whereas the banks that have kind of tightened up want like 200, 250 US. So, there's a choice to be made there. And more importantly, the delta has shrunk, both on passports. Georgia's passport, and some of our Georgian colleagues, they just got access, visa-free travel to China today. I think geopolitically that's interesting. Whether you like going to China or not, it means that more countries are opening up to places like Georgia. They're not opening up to the US. They're not opening up to other Western countries. I'd like to have some neutral countries in my portfolio, but the passport difference between the US and Georgia now versus even 7 or 8 years ago is dramatic, let alone now versus the Soviet times. I mean, it was obviously a far different picture. You couldn't even leave. Colombia. Colombians can now go to London the exact same as an American can. It was only, I was in Colombia in 2015. They had just gotten visa-free travel to the Schengen area in Europe. So less than a decade ago, Colombians, you could travel around Latin America, but it wasn't that good, all right, for traveling around the West. Look at a place like Turkey, for example. That passport's pretty good, except for the West. Not a bad passport to have if you're not traveling to Europe or the US. What if one day, things change in Turkey and the relations with Europe improve? Listen, that might hurt you in other ways. Maybe it's nice to have some geopolitical diversification, but they've talked about Turkey getting access to the Schengen area. Now you've got a pretty solid passport, and all you had to do to get it was to buy a property. But that price keeps going up because more and more people are interested in it. So as Nomad Capitalist diversifies more and we get more clients from some of our efforts that you don't see here online, we get more clients offline, we get more referrals from around the world, we're seeing that those people realize the benefit of having a plan A, plan B, plan C. I saw someone the other day mention like plan F. Yeah, have a plan F. Have a plan for anything that could happen. And for me, I don't mind having multiple plans because my lifestyle just enjoys it. It's not like, oh my God, I'm planning for the coup. I just like to live in different places. I like to have different homes. I like to have different, it's enjoyable for me. And so I think that's why. I mean, the difference between, and by the way, Nomad Capitalist Live this year, Kuala Lumpur again. Why? Best value city in the world. Not saying it's the best city in the world, but it's up there in my opinion. Best value. And the difference between Kuala Lumpur and Milwaukee, Adelaide, Birmingham, it's a lot closer. I mean, I would probably argue that Kuala Lumpur is better than some cities in the US and the UK. I mean, for sure. People come, they're like, oh my, I didn't know it would be this nice. People from all over the world came last year to Kuala Lumpur and said, I wasn't expecting this. I've never been here, I wasn't expecting this. People were saying, man, this isn't really a trade-off. When you factor in much better, more efficient, cheaper healthcare and the tasty food and it's cheaper, like this is a steal. And that's why, unlike the people who have, events where you go to Austin and they try and tell you how to go overseas and diversify as a global citizen from Austin, Texas, like you're not learning anything. You're just being baby. They're just taking your money. Our event, Nomad Capitalist Live, is in Kuala Lumpur, where I think you should see it, and you'll start to see how the delta has shrunk. So my point is, why would a wealthy person want to have a toehold in some of these emerging countries? Because they want to be diversified across the globe. One guy came to me and said, I want to have something on every continent. Forget Australia, forget obviously Antarctica. And if you're calling North America just the US and Canada, it's like, I want Central America, South America, Africa, Europe, maybe even Eastern Europe, and then he already had Asia. And he said, hey, I'll be covered no matter what happens. And my kids will have opportunities. And you don't have to live in those places. You might have some great investment returns from some of those places. One of those places might become the next big thing. In the meantime, you've diversified your assets around the world so that when bad stuff happens, you're covered. You've got places to go. Your money's a little safer. That's why I think, people, we help people move to Switzerland. We've helped people move to Ireland, to Portugal, to Spain. We've helped people move to Greece. I don't know that many people have moved to Singapore. But we've helped people move. We have people who already live in, like I said, London, who come to us. They're expats in London. But, when someone comes to us, all the Mexican clients, they're like, yeah, Canada. That's what all my friends say. And I'm like, you're not going to save any money in taxes. You're not going to like the weather. The politics aren't what you think they are. You just are being sold this brand image. And eventually they're like, all right, fine. And they at least go to one of the more tax-friendly European countries where they can also get citizenship. I mean, if you're Latin American, you can go to Spain, you can get citizenship in a couple of years. And you can do so on a relatively tax-friendly basis. Harder for non-Latinos. But, that's why. Eduardo Saverin, the Facebook co-founder, lives in Singapore. I don't believe maybe I haven't seen it. I don't believe he's a Singaporean. He's Brazilian. So he doesn't live in Brazil. He's got the option to live in Brazil or around South America. Like, who cares? Like, you can live wherever you want, but why wouldn't you want access to all these different places? That's why we tell people who are successful to have these different places in their portfolios, because that's the growth. That's the future. That's the opportunity. And in many of these cases, they're recovering from being anti-freedom and they're moving in the right direction, whereas Western countries are moving in the wrong direction. I think the secret to wealth creation is momentum. And that's what wealthy people are looking for. The places that we talk about may not be there quite yet, but they can get them in their portfolio and grow with them.